All right, so I'm going to walk you through how to build your breadboard circuits. You should have all these things in your kits. You should have a multimeter. Again, yours might not be exactly the same as this. Some of them are different, but something like that has a knob. You should have a battery pack. Again, yours may also look different than this, but it should be able to hold 4 batteries, I believe. You should have a little box that has some wires in it. Again, it might be a little bit different, might have different amounts. That's fine, we don't need very many of them. Try not to lose them. You should have some extra wires. You probably have maybe 4 or 5 of these little alligator clip wires where you can squeeze them and they open up. And then you should have your breadboard, which is this thing. Again, yours I think are colored. I think I gave out all those, so all I have left is these ones that don't have colors on them. But again, they work the same. It's still the same rules. Then the outside, everything in the columns, so everything here is connected. Everything here is connected. And on the inside, I'm going to use one of these as a pointer. On the inside, everything in the rows, so everything like from here to here, those 5 are connected, and those 5, and those 5, and those 5, and so on. And again, this middle break separates the 2 sides from each other. So the first thing you want to do after you make sure everything works, again, turn on your multimeter and make sure numbers come up on it. I would set it to one of the voltages and make sure numbers come up. You want to look at your resistor. Oh, you also should have a bunch of resistors. So one of the things you want to do is you want to look at your resistors and then kind of sort through them. Again, in the other video, I talked to you about how you read your resistors. I'm not going to go through that right now, but you can watch the other video and you can figure out what the values are. So let's say I'm just going to use 3 of them. So I have 3 resistors here. All right, so what I usually want to do first is I want to set up my, figure out where I'm going to plug things in. Now in my case, this breadboard only has 1 column on each side, one of the long columns. Yours might have 2, so if yours has 2, you can use both of them. Mine only has 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my battery pack and I'm going to plug each of these sides into one of those long columns. Now your battery packs might be a little bit different. If you look at these, they have, I don't know if you can see, but they have these little fine wires on the ends. So if yours have those, you should be able to, if you're kind of careful, plug them right into those holes. You should be able to push, just be careful with them. And you should be able to put them right into, and they should stay in there. Like these holes, remember the way these work, there's little tiny clamps on the inside, so when you push a wire onto them, they kind of hold it in place. So again, depending on your battery pack, if it has those, you can just push them in and they'll stay. Now, if you don't have those, if yours has like kind of, if the wires look like they're frayed on the end a little bit, like they're twisted wires, or they won't fit in there for some reason, what you can do is just grab a couple of your loose wires here. So I'll grab just 2 of these and stick them into those spots. And then take these ends and use some of your alligator clips here and just clip these to the end of the wires on your battery. Now mine might not say because my wires are made to go in, those are made to go into there, so they're really tiny little wires, but so I can clip one there. I also probably need some better alligator clips. Then I clip one over there, and that does the same thing. Again, I'm connecting the wires on my battery to those 2 spots on my breadboard. Now I'm going to undo the alligator clip thing because it's easier for me to use these little wires. But again, it depends on what type of battery packs. Again, some of you might have different ones because we try to give one out to every single student. So if you have a different one that doesn't fit in there, that's all right too. It works just as fine if you use these little jumpery cable things. So I'll get rid of those, and I'll put mine back the way it was. And I know I'm going to plug them in there. I'm going to keep this one disconnected now because I don't want to have my circuit hooked up while I'm building it. I'll put this back in at the end, but I know it's going to go into that spot. All right, now I know where my battery goes. Next thing is I'm going to build my circuit. So I'm going to use my resistors here. And again, they just push into the circuit. So my next step is I'm going to just build the resistor part of my circuit somewhere. So let's say I want to build these in, let's start with the ones in series. right? Remember, in series, they're going to be connected where one end of the resistor connects to something, and then the other end connects to the next resistor, then the other end of that connects to the next one. So I want to put them in a line. So I'm going to just stick this in 2 spots. Again, I want to make sure I use 2 different rows because I don't want the 2 ends connected to each other. So here I use this row. Right, I use this row and this row. So my next resistor, I'm going to plug into the same row as the end of that one. And then I'm going to plug the other end into somewhere else. And again, you can bend these, just be careful, try not to break them. And remember, it doesn't matter which hole you use in each row, as long as you're in the same row, you're fine. And then here, I'm going to go from here to some other row. Just pushed in, doesn't matter, it can be straight. I tend to be a little bit crazy and put them straight. They don't have to be straight if you want to be a little bit, crazy by trying to make them exactly perfect. If you want to have them bent, angled, it doesn't matter as long as the connected ones here, these 2 here should be in the same row, and these 2 here should be in the same row. And now I got 3 of them in series. So that's good. My circuit isn't built yet though, remember. Because for my circuit to be built, I need to connect my things in series to my battery. So right now, this end isn't connected to anything. So what I want to do is I want to use again, you can use whatever size wires you want. I'll use a smaller one here for this one, this little yellow wire. And I'm going to go from something in the same row as this. So that's in the same row as the end of this resistor. And I'm going to plug it into, remember, everything on the outside column here is connected to each other. So I'm just going to connect it somewhere in that column. So I'll put it like that. So now I know this resistor is connected to that end of the yellow wire. The other end of the yellow wire is connected to this part, which goes to the battery. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the other end of my series circuit. I'm going to connect it, though, not to this column, but to the column on the other side. So I'll plug that in there. I will jump it over to there, because that column is where I'm going to plug back in my battery. I'll check and make sure. Remember, in this case, this side of my resistor should be connected, whatever row that's in, should be the same row that this end of my wire is connected to. Goes back there. And now my circuit's looking good. And now I can just plug my battery back into the other column. And I should have a circuit now that works. And if I kind of trace the path, let's see, I can go from the battery, through the green wire, through this resistor, through that resistor, through this resistor, through the yellow wire, and back out through my battery. So there is my series circuit, what it looks like when it's put together. Now for my parallel, so this is 3 things in series. Again, now if you want the part where you want to remove one, you can just take one out. Let's say you remove the last one. Remove it, and then you can just change where this green one goes because you want it to go from the end of it. Just move that to there. Now I have 2 things in series. So I'm going to unhook my battery. There's my series circuit. I already built the parallel one, so I'll bring the parallel one in. This is what the parallel one looks like. Again, this time you have the 2 ends of the parallel one are connected in the same column, or the same row. Same row. And then I have a jumper going from that same row again to one of the columns, the other row where the other sides are connected to the other column, and then I would just plug my battery, just like I did before, into my 2 columns. And now I have my 2 resistors hooked up in parallel. Again, if I trace the path, it goes through the red wire, through this green wire, splits, goes through the 2 resistors independently, comes back together, goes through this green wire, then it comes out and goes back to my battery. There's my 2 resistors in parallel. I only had 2 of these left, so let's unhook this. If I want to do it in a combined circuit, I'm going to add one more. This time I'm going to add it, one side's going to go where the 2 parallel ones together, the other one goes to its own row. So again, if you look right here, all 3 resistors are connected together in this row. The 2 parallel ones are connected there. The one by itself is all by itself over here. Now I want to just go from this end here back to my battery end. And then again, I would plug in plug my battery back in, and I have my combined circuit where I have two resistors in parallel. That group is in series with the other resistor. Let's unhook this. Next part. So how do we measure? So the tricky part is going to be how do we measure voltage and how do we measure resistance? Now this part ends up being a little bit confusing in the beginning, but once you realize what you're doing, it ends up being pretty simple. So to measure voltage is kind of the easier one. Because remember, voltage is measured across two things in a circuit. So first you want to do is you're going to take your voltage meter. You're going to notice there's a lot of numbers around here. Look at the units. So mine says there should be a V with a straight line. That's the voltage we want. That's the direct current voltage. The wiggly line, that's like you're testing your wall outlet voltage and things like that. We want the direct current one. So we're up here. And again, there's different settings because it gives you different precisions. You want to use the smallest one that works with your numbers. So we're using about 5 to 6 volts. So we want to set ours, let's see. If I look, we got 200 milli. Well, that's 0.2. That's too small. We got 2,000 millivolts. Well, that's like 2 volts. So that's also too small. The next one we have is 20 volts. So 20 volts is bigger than we need. So that's the smallest value, or the smallest one that has like the whole range of voltage we need. So we're going to set ours to 20 volts. That's what we're going to measure our voltage on. And then what you can do is, let's plug our circuit in. I'm not really sure what this is going to do because I just picked some resistors. Hopefully I don't break anything. We're going to take our, and again, a way to check to make sure this is working too, if you touch these, you should go to 0 because there should be no difference from one end to the other. And these little probes are going to measure the voltage difference between one end to the other. Again, you might have done labs when you were a little kid where you stuck these into like a lemon or something like that, and you get a voltage reading because the acid in the lemon actually can store a voltage across it. So if I want to measure the voltage across any 2 points, I can just touch these to those 2 points. So let's say I want to measure the voltage across this resistor that's all by itself. I can just touch these to it, and it says 4.45 volts. It gives me a reading. I can then measure across these two in parallel, and it says 1.48. I can measure it across the whole circuit. It gives me, it's 5.89. And now, you might get scared if you've never done this before. So we're using very low voltage, so if I touch this, it's not going to hurt me. Even though the circuit's on right now, the way it's built, it doesn't have enough energy to really hurt me. Again, you should be careful in real life if you're using higher voltage. You don't want to be sticking your fingers in there, so you'd be a lot more careful. And make sure when you use these, you don't touch them at all with your hands. But in this case, if you touch them, it's not going to hurt you. So measuring voltage, you just take your 2 probes, and then you basically touch them across any 2 spots. But remember, you want to cross the spot. If I put it here, if I measure the voltage like here and here, well, that's across a wire. It should be 0. But on the other side of the resistor, I get a voltage. And if it's negative, don't worry about it being negative. We just care about the values now. And one more thing, make sure some of yours have 2 plugs, and it doesn't matter. Some of them have 3 little plug holes. When you measure voltage, you want to make sure one of your probes, the color doesn't matter again. One of the probes is in the one that says COM, probably. And the other probe is in the one that says voltage, and it has this one says like V, ohm, milliamp. So the one that says voltage. If you have 3 of them, there's one in that probably says 10 amp. That's the one you don't want to use. So you want to use the COM port, and you want to use the voltage port. Make sure these are plugged, and make sure they're pushed all the way in. Sometimes if you don't get a reading, it could be because those aren't pushed all the way in. All right, so that's measuring voltage. That's the easy part. Now the hard part is going to be to measure the current. That's when you got to be careful about. And if you remember from our other video, we said the way we do that is if I want to measure the current, for example, let's say in my whole circuit, what I do is I unplug the wire I want to measure the current in. So let's say I want to measure the current in this green wire that's going through there. I unplug one side of it, so it's loose. I then plug in another wire to the spot that I unplugged it from, which would be like right here. It was in that column. Now I have 2 loose ends, and I want to hook up my probe to those 2 loose ends. Now, again, we're using low voltage, so it's not going to really hurt you. So if you do this if your hands touch it and you hold it with your hands, it's going to be okay. If that makes you very, very uncomfortable, that is fine. What you can do then is, again, these should work. I got to get some better alligator clips for myself. What you can do is you hook these alligator clips to your probe. one to each probe, like so. And then you use the alligator clips to hook up to these things. And I can use an alligator clip. And again, I'm going to unplug, again, I'm going to be safe, unplug my battery. Again, my alligator clips are garbage, so hopefully this will work. But I'll hook one to that wire. Hook one to that wire. Again, just be careful to make sure they don't touch each other. And now, when the current comes in, it's going to go through the blue wire, through my meter, through the green wire, and then through the rest of my circuit. So that should give me the total current in my circuit. Now, before I plug this in, I'm going to turn this on and make sure I turn it to the correct. So I got to do a couple things now to measure current. Again, some of your meters might if they only have 2 of these plugs, you're going to be fine. You don't have to really do anything. If yours is like mine, actually, you should be able to keep the plugs the way they are. It should be fine. It's only if you need to use the big current, you have to move it over. So now I don't want to measure voltage anymore. I'm not going to use these readings here. I'm going to use the ones that say amps. So those are over here on mine. They say mine has microamps, milliamps, and then 10 amps. So again, I want to use the smallest that contains everything. Now we're unsure what our value is going to be. I can tell you they're going to be small. So we want to set ours to 200 milliamps. So the 200M, that's how I want to set mine to. So I'll rotate that over to there. And again, that's why you want to make sure this is disconnected when you do that, because rolling through the different amp things, you could, if this is hooked up wrong, you can actually break the meter. By doing that, if too much current goes through it, it'll blow the meter out. Well, it blows the fuse in the meter. So I'm going to set that to 200 milliamps. Again, I'm getting no reading because I don't have anything plugged in. And now when I do get a reading, though, remember, this is going to be in milliamps. So you got to be just realize that you're going to get a number that's bigger than you expect, probably. I'm going to plug this wire in, and hopefully when I plug it in, I should get a reading. I did, oh, the wire came out. I was like, I did for a second, then I went away because the wire didn't stay in. There we go. And this says 9.3. Remember, this is 9.3 milliamps. So that's 9.3 times 10 to the negative 3 amps. So again, we're using pretty small currents because we want to be safe. We don't want a lot of big currents going around. And that would measure my current through there. Take my reading down. I'm going to then unplug my battery because I don't want to screw anything up and break anything. And now I'm going to keep this blue one plugged in if I'm going to use my jumper cables because I don't want to, that's annoying to reconnect. I'll unhook this one. I'll plug my green wire back in. And now let's say I want to measure the current through this resistor. Again, our technique is you unplug one side. You plug the blue wire into the spot you unplugged it from, which was right there in the same row as those other ones. And then you take your other jumper cable or your other probe, whatever way you're working, and then you hook it to the thing that you unplugged. Hook that right to there. And now I'll plug it back in. Again, it's still set to 200 milliamps as the maximum. And boop. And it gives me 2.5 milliamps. So there's I forget what the other one was. I think it was like 3 or something like that. So that shows me when it gets divided in there, that's how much goes into that branch. And again, your number might change a little bit because batteries aren't perfect. And again, we're measuring very, very small currents. But that is it. We're just going to use this to build a little circuit to measure voltage, to measure current, change around, make some different circuits, have fun, learn how to use some of these things if you've never used them before. They look like they're scary, but they're not that difficult to use.